Hi there, and welcome once again to Plan to Protect with Melodie Bissell, the safest podcast on the internet. My name is Joshua Bissell, and I'm the editor of this weekly podcast, where we tackle topics of abuse prevention and vulnerable sector protection. And we're in the midst of a series on identifying and addressing common gaps that we find in policies and procedures for organizations that work with the vulnerable sector. Today's topic is all about how sometimes our policies and procedures can get out of date, and how we can work to fix them. Thank you for joining us for Plan to Protect with Melodie Bissell, the safest podcast on the internet. Here's Melodie.
So, we're back for another week of discussing common gaps that we find in policies. As you know, here at Plan to Protect, we're all about safeguarding. We encourage our clients, which are schools, camps, daycares, sporting leagues, nursing homes, transportation companies, any type of organization that works with the vulnerable sector being children, youth, and vulnerable adults, which could be the elderly, individuals with disabilities, new immigrants, or anywhere where there is a power differential. As you know, a few months ago, we did a whole series on power differentials. Well, right now you're in the middle of a series on common gaps. We started the beginning of April about 4 weeks ago. We've looked at already about 4 different common gaps that we have found when we do policy audits and reviews of individual organization policies and procedures. And we started with the most common gaps, but actually we're still in the middle of some of the most common gaps that we have found when we do policy audits and review. And we do these all the time. We write policies on behalf of organizations, and we also review organizations' policies and procedures to try to help them achieve that high standard of abuse prevention and protection. Safeguarding, that's what we're all about here at Plan to Protect. So today we're actually going to tackle 2 common gaps. They sort of go hand in hand. The first one relates to not updating your policies and procedures. And the second one, which goes hand in hand with that, is that your policies only focus on child safety and abuse prevention for children's programming. The reason I say these go hand in hand is because at Plan to Protect, our manuals were first written 25 years ago. It's hard to believe that our manuals are celebrating their 25th anniversary. We first wrote Plan to Protect, an abuse prevention manual 25 years ago for churches, and it was for child safety. In 2000, we added a whole chapter on protecting youth, teenagers. We brought in Dave Brotherton, who was a youth expert, and he helped us write a whole chapter in the manuals on youth programming. And then in about 2012, 2013, we were asked by insurance companies to incorporate vulnerable adults. So we came up with best practices. We collected best practices on vulnerable adults. We looked at the elderly. We looked at individuals with disabilities. We added to our advisory team individuals with expertise in occupational therapy and working with the vulnerable adults, individuals with disabilities. When Canada and the United States started sponsoring refugees and bringing in refugees and helping with refugee settlement, I think that was about 2015. We brought in advisory council members around the whole area of new immigrants. So Plan to Protect manual, yes, it's 25 years old. Yes, it was specifically around children when we first started, but now we are committed to helping to safeguard all vulnerable people. So these 2 gaps go hand in hand. One of those is that you don't update your policies to reflect the changes. And the second one is that you still only keep it within children's programming. And you even delegate the responsibility of abuse prevention to whoever is running your children's program. So I see these two gaps going hand in hand. If you first wrote abuse prevention policies and procedures in early 2000s or even in the 1990s or 1980s, you were really looking at children's programming. But do your policies and procedures, do they reflect all the vulnerable sector? Children, youth, vulnerable adults, the elderly, individuals with disabilities, new immigrants, where there's a power differential. That's what we're talking about when we talk about safeguarding and making sure that your policies reflect the whole scope of the vulnerable sector. And without that, you are positioning your organization for liability and risk of abuse. Over the last 2 or 3 years, we have heard story after story after story of power differentials, sexual harassment within organizations, fallen leaders, where there were not policies and procedures that called for accountability of even your senior leaders and your senior directors, your pastors, those individuals with influence within your organization. So I really want to encourage you to go look at your policies and procedures. You probably don't even have to look more than the first 2 pages. What is the title of your policies? Does it say a child protection policy? Does it say a policy for children and youth? Or are you capturing policies for the vulnerable sector? If you don't see it on your front cover, go to your call of action, your preamble. Throughout the document, what are you referencing as your audience that you are committed to protect? I want to speak to this area that I mentioned just briefly, and that is who is responsible for policies and procedures for safeguarding within your organization. Too often, I see this delegated to children's ministry directors or the children's department. And right there, you're setting your organization and this individual up for failure. If it is an initiative for children, youth, and vulnerable adults, you can't ask one person who only really has the mandate of children's programming to ensure that safeguarding happens throughout the whole organization. I'm so proud of some of our members who have a designated person responsible for Plan to Protect, whether that be a volunteer that reports to the board, or whether that be a paid employee, and it is their primary responsibility to ensure that safeguarding happens. If I could have one wish, my wish would be that every organization that works with children, youth, and vulnerable adults have a safeguarding officer. Someone that is responsible, and it is their mandate for safeguarding. Now, I tell you, this is a difficult position. Only the most brave take on a position of being child protection officer or vulnerable person officer. You're not always the most popular person because not everyone buys in to the importance of policies and procedures. And too often I hear, well, she sort of goes over the top, or I don't think all these policies and procedures are necessary. My grandson is almost 7 months old, and what I wouldn't do to protect that little guy. Oh my goodness. He is so important to me. I would jump to the moon if I could to protect that little guy. When I hear people say that the policies and procedures are a little bit over the top, that we don't really need as much safeguarding as we have in place. My heart breaks. My heart breaks when I hear those stories. Because if you read the lived experiences of individuals that have been abused, that have been harmed, and they are struggling with PTSD, they deserve the protection they didn't receive. So please keep your policies and procedures up to date. Please ensure that this responsibility is given to someone who's passionate about it, who's committed to protection, who sees that it's not just about child safety, but it's for child, youth, vulnerable adult protection. Another reason when I see that it's only given to someone within children's programming, conflict starts to arise between the children and the youth programming. I've often said that I think my gray hair is because of youth leaders that just don't buy into safeguarding. I've had people spit at me. I have had people swear at me. I have had people tell me that I've ruined their programs because of safeguarding of those young people. And honestly, I'm not fazed by that. Now, I tend to be a people pleaser, but not when it comes to safeguarding. Because our young people deserve to be protected. They deserve to have role models. These young people deserve to be protected. I really want to encourage you to look at your policies and procedures. Who have you given the responsibility of safeguarding to? Is it someone that reports to the board or senior leadership? Is it someone that has opportunity and authority to initiate safeguarding across the whole organization, not just one department? Is it for children, youth, and vulnerable adults? Have those policies been updated? When I first think of our policies early in 2000s, late 1990s, early 2000s, there were no policies and procedures in place around social media, online engagement, pandemics, even severe allergies. Those were all absent. We continue to research and collect best practices. And yes, we continue to write policies to reflect the culture and society where we find ourselves today. Just in the past year, we have written policies on transitioning back from COVID-19. We've also written policies for online engagement. We've re-looked at our policies on vaccinations. I want to encourage you to shore up your gaps of your policies, to strengthen them, to make sure that they are current. Make sure that your policies have robust documentation management. Make sure that your policies reflect the legal duty to report abuse in 2021. The laws continue to change in the United States. More and more states are putting zero statute of limitations, no statute of limitations for reporting child abuse. We're seeing that change happen across the United States. In Canada, there is no statute of limitations on child abuse, and every person in Canada is a mandatory reporter of abuse. That means your policies, as we've discussed other weeks, should not say that volunteers must first report to leadership and a decision will be made whether a report should be made to Child and Family Services or law enforcement. That's why it's so important to keep your policies and procedures up to date. So today we have talked about two common gaps. They go hand in hand. The first common gap is only delegating abuse prevention to those that work in children's programming. Please don't do that. Please don't give child protection or protection for the whole organization, the whole church, to your children's pastor. That person probably is overwhelmed with the amount of work they already have to do. They may only work part-time. They may only have skills in working with children, and now you're placing the onus on that person to implement safeguarding across children, youth, and vulnerable adults, requiring many different skills. We encourage that safeguarding be given to either a committee or an individual that reports to the board. And then the second gap we talked about today was, what does your policies and procedures include? We encourage you to include in your policies and procedures the same thing that your insurance company requires to qualify for abuse coverage, that you have safeguarding policies and procedures in place for children, youth, and vulnerable adults. If you find that this is a gap within your policies and procedures, this week I'd like you to reach out to us at info@plantoprotect.com. We can help review and do a policy audit for you on your policies. We can do a gap analysis to identify the gaps that we find in your policies and procedures and provide recommended wording for you to update your policies with. If you need a lot of help with your policies and procedures, if you really know that they are out of date and you need new policies and procedures, please reach out to us. This is a service that we offer at Plan to Protect, and we have a solution for every budget level. If you have less than $100, we've got a solution for you to update your policies and procedures with a budget of less than $100. If you want us to do the work for you, we can do that and turn around those policies in a short amount of time. I really hope I've challenged you today. I'm here to help you. I'm here to support your efforts in achieving a high standard of protection. Thank you so much for joining us again today. We still have a few more gaps to cover, so join me again next week. We talk about 2 additional gaps that are found within policies and procedures. Have a great week, everyone. Take care. Bye.